Hello everyone, and welcome to this video on how to become more mindful using some skills from a type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy. Now, dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT for short, is a therapeutic approach that we as clinicians use that covers a range of different skills. Mindfulness is one area of the skills that we teach, but if you have a look at some of the other videos I have, we also look at skills that can help us manage emotions in our day-to-day life. We have skills relating to how to navigate and manage quite intense and distressing feelings. And we also have a module within DBT that's all about how to improve our relationships with other people, and all sorts of relationships included in that. So today we're going to be focusing on mindfulness and how DBT approaches the concept of mindfulness. Now, my name is Dr. Anastasia Hronis. I am a clinical psychologist and founder of the Australian Institute for Human Wellness. I'm a clinician, so I see clients for a range of various mental health concerns. But I'm also an academic, and I work at the University of Technology in Sydney, providing lecturing and also conducting research into various mental health conditions. So, how to become more mindful? Now, it's really important we start off by understanding what exactly this concept of mindfulness is. And you may or may not have heard of it before. Mindfulness is something that has entered, mainstream psychology in recent years. And a variation of mindfulness is what we refer to as meditation. So often people have heard of meditation and may have even done some meditation before. When we refer to mindfulness, we're talking about a mental state that's achieved by focusing our awareness on the present moment, while calmly acknowledging and accepting our feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. So really key to this concept of mindfulness is this ability to be present in the moment, focusing on the here and now. What exactly is going on in this moment, and not sort of getting swept up or caught up with other competing thoughts, feelings, experiences, or bodily sensations. So if I take this moment to be mindful, I'm bringing my attention and my awareness to the fact that I'm sitting in front of my laptop, giving a presentation on mindfulness. I'm sitting in my office. I have my feet planted on the ground. I'm sitting on my seat. I can hear the traffic going past outside the window of my office. And I'm very aware of what's happening for me in the here and the now. I'm not thinking about the past, the future, what's to come, but I'm in this moment. So we can think about our thoughts on this spectrum, where mindfulness ideally helps us be in the present moment, but we can have thoughts that are relating either to the future or to the past. Now, when we talk about the future can be as soon as what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, or it might be as far into the future as what might be happening in 5 or 10 years. When I think to the past, it might be, getting out of bed this morning and getting ready for work, or it might be as far back as to thinking about elements of my childhood. So our thoughts exist on this spectrum, but mindfulness helps us bring our thoughts into the moment. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this is important. When we think about the future, if we do this too much, we can fall into a pattern that we call worry. Now, we often know we're doing worrying when we think particular thoughts, and these are what-if thoughts. So, what if something bad happens? What if I lose my job? What if I get into a car accident? What if my partner leaves me? What if? All sorts of different what-if thoughts we can think. And these thoughts often, and these questions often don't really have answers that we can necessarily provide. So they stay in our mind left unanswered. And this is what leads to worry. It's not to say that we don't want to think about the future at all, and that's certainly not the goal of mindfulness. The goal of mindfulness is to have greater control over where we choose to place our thoughts. We don't want to be falling into the trap of excessive future-focused thinking. And if we do fall into this trap of worry, this can often lead to anxiety for people. On the other end of the spectrum, the opposite is what we refer to as rumination. So this is excessive thinking about the past. And the way we know we might be doing this is we ask ourselves the question of why. Why did that happen? Why did that have to happen to me? Why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why did that other person do what they did? These questions of why. And again, these questions may or may not have answers that we can actually provide ourselves with. Much of the time they don't. Otherwise, we wouldn't still be asking ourselves these questions. But if we do this process of rumination too often and with too much of an intensity, it can result in feeling quite low and down and possible depression. So ultimately, we want to be having greater flexibility and control over where we place our thoughts and ideally being present focused. Again, not to say that there isn't merit and value in thinking about the past or the future, but generally we experience a greater sense of calmness when we are present focused. So ideally, mindfulness can help us build flexibility in relationship to our thoughts. This is a really key concept, this idea of flexibility. And I talk about this with a lot of the people that I work with, that ultimately often our goal within therapy or when we're trying to improve our mental health is to build flexibility. Now, if I put this in the context of the experiences we have, in any given situation, we have our thoughts. Now, this might be in the form of words, it might be in the form of pictures, it might be memories, but we have thoughts of some sort. These can then influence the feelings that we experience, and then these influence the behaviors and the actions that we take. And we can fall into particular sorts of cycles. Now, what we're trying to do is build flexibility in terms of what I think, what I feel, and what I do. Mindfulness helps us build flexibility in the relationship we hold with our thoughts. So mindfulness doesn't actually look at the content of my thought. It doesn't really matter what I'm thinking, but it's how strongly attached I am to that thought that matters. Can I put some distance between myself and that thought? Can I choose to let that thought go and bring myself to the present moment? That's if you imagine your thought as almost something tangible that you can hold. The flexibility is around how close do I hold it? How far away do I hold it? Do I want to put it down or do I want to pick it up? It doesn't really matter what the thought is or what it says. The flexibility comes in my relationship with my thoughts. So mindfulness is the act of consciously focusing the mind in the present moment, but not just being present focused. We want to do so without judgment and without attachment to the moment. So when we talk about not having attachment, that's this ability to let a thought go, to bring it back and to let it go. So when we're mindful, we're aware of the present moment. And the contrast, I guess, of this is if we ever find ourselves sort of functioning in an automatic way or quite a habitual way, or if you're familiar with the term of sort of being on autopilot, this would be the opposite to being mindful. Now, why is this an important skill to have and how can it help us? Why be mindful? Well, mindfulness allows us to be aware of our own personal triggers. It helps us build our awareness of ourselves and helps us get to know ourselves a little bit better. It helps us build the ability to recognize if a certain situation, a certain feeling, a certain person might sort of bring up particular personal triggers for us. We also know that mindfulness helps build emotion regulation. Now, I've got a picture of the brain there because we know that emotion regulation within humans exists in the prefrontal cortex. So that's this front part of the brain that is responsible for higher order thinking and functioning. So in terms of building emotion regulation, this is a crucial skill for us to be able to have to navigate different feelings that come up for us day to day. And we all have this skill, right? Because otherwise, any feeling that came up for us, we would just completely react and act from that place. But for almost everyone, we have an ability to kind of manage our feelings and regulate them. Mindfulness helps build this skill even further. And finally, mindfulness helps us choose how we respond to situations rather than purely reacting from emotions. Now, we can break mindfulness down into a few different parts so that we can fully understand how we do mindfulness. I mean, at the moment, we've been talking about this concept of mindfulness and being present focused without judgment and without attachment. But how do we do that? What does it actually involve? Well, one part of mindfulness is this notion of observing. Simply observing and attending to events, our emotions, our behavioral responses, what's happening in our environment, and maybe what's happening within us. And in doing this observing, we're not necessarily trying to change anything or stop anything. So if we're having a painful experience, we're not necessarily trying to stop that. And if we're having a pleasant experience, we're not necessarily trying to prolong that either. We are simply observers of our own experiences. We're just simply noting what is happening and acknowledging that. We're not actually engaging with trying to change it in any way. Another part of this concept of mindfulness skills is the notion of describing. So once we've done the observation and we've observed and taken note of what's happening, describing involves applying some sort of label to what we observe and the experience that we're having. It's important that we do this objectively without judgment. So we want to be non-evaluative in our approach and not necessarily labeling any sort of experience as good or bad, but just that it is. If I'm having, for example, symptoms of anxiety in my body, I might be experiencing my heart rate beating a little bit faster, might experience some trembling in my hands, I might start to feel hot and flustered. Mindfulness allows me to observe these bodily sensations, and I can put words to the symptoms that I'm just experiencing, but I'm not necessarily labeling them or giving them a weighting or value as being good or bad, simply that they are. And then within mindfulness, we have this notion of one mindfully. So this is the ability to focus the mind and our awareness in the current moment's activity. So focusing simply on one thing, being present for one thing, rather than splitting my attention across several different tasks or activities that I might be doing, or completing one sort of task but thinking about something else. It's simply this notion of just doing one thing at a time, or being present with one thing at a time. You know, if that's a mental process, I'm present for simply that mental process in the moment. Now, if we take a step further and think about how we can practically start to apply mindfulness in our day-to-day life, there's a range of different ways that we can practice mindfulness skills. The most popular one and common one that people have often perhaps tried or maybe heard of is this notion of mindfulness of breath. So this is essentially our ability to bring all our awareness to the present moment and focus our attention simply on our breathing. Now, I really want to highlight that when we do this, and we will just take a moment to practice it, but when we do this exercise, it is very natural and normal and common that our mind will think about other things. We won't just be able to remain focused on the breath, but we'll think about other things as well. Now, I often hear from people that if they try to do a mindfulness exercise and their mind starts to wander and think about other things, they feel like they've failed or like they're not doing it correctly. And it's simply not the case. Mindfulness is building the ability to notice when my mind has gone somewhere else and then bring it back. That's the essentially the muscle that I'm building up. It's not that my mind won't wander. That's very natural and normal, but I want to practice the ability to bring it back to the moment. So if you'll take a moment, if you're sitting down, maybe just sort of find a comfortable position in your seat. We recommend that people either close their eyes to do this sort of mindfulness practice, but if you don't want to close your eyes, perhaps just focus on the floor and find a spot on the floor that you can look at without distraction. So I invite you to close your eyes or focus on a spot on the floor. And we're going to take this opportunity to focus all our attention on our breathing. Focus all your attention to the breath as it flows in and out through your nose. Gentle breaths, just noticing the sensation of breathing. Don't try to control your breath or change it in any way, but simply notice the experience. Observe your breath. Is your breathing quick or is it slow? Are the breaths deep or are they shallow? Notice what the temperature of the air feels like as it flows through your nose. And if while you do this, your mind wanders or perhaps becomes distracted, just notice where your mind's gone and then bring it back to the present moment, using your breath as an anchor for the here and now. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back to the room. Now, that was just a very short taster of what a mindfulness of breath experience might be like, using the breathing as an anchor for the present moment. We've done a very short version of that, but there are many variations of that you can do, and much longer versions. And in that short version, it might not have been the time for your mind to wander and kind of think about other things. But often we do find that if someone were to do a mindfulness of breath exercise for, say, 10, 15 minutes, that their mind at times will wander off and start to think about other things. And so we use this as a practice to build the muscle of being able to be present focused. Now, it's not to say you have to use this skill in this way, eyes closed, focusing on nothing but the breath. You might be at work, say, and you're feeling a bit overwhelmed with the tasks that you have to complete. You can do a very quick, brief, short mindfulness of breath exercise simply while sitting at your desk to just ground yourself in the present moment and reorient yourself to the here and now. And it doesn't have to be done with audio or, with your eyes closed or anything like that, but just choosing your breath in that moment to be the anchor. Now, we can practice mindfulness in lots of other ways. I recommend you try perhaps a mindfulness to music exercise. So playing a particular piece of music that you like and having a listen to it. And again, closing your eyes if you would wish to, and focusing all your attention on the music. And really doing this in a way where you're noticing and observing. So thinking what instruments are playing, observing the dynamics and how the sound of the dynamics changes, noticing if there's differences in terms of the pitch, are the notes higher or are they lower? Is someone singing or is this instrumental? So really just being that observer again, without judgment of good or bad, but just noticing what is. We also have a variation of mindfulness strategies, which we refer to as a grounding technique. Now, this can be particularly useful at times of quite heightened and increased stress. So when we practice mindfulness, we can have an anchor that's internal. So an internal anchor is something like the breath, for example, or I can have an anchor that's external to me. So that might be something like music. This grounding technique helps us use anchors outside of ourselves to ground ourselves in the present moment. So this is a quick, simple, easy one that people can do anywhere they are, but it's really quite effective. And I often refer to this as 5-4-3. So we're going to identify and observe 5 things that we can see around us, 4 things that we can hear, which is particularly difficult if you're in a fairly quiet room, and 3 things you can feel. And when I say feel, what I'm referring to is things that you can feel without necessarily reaching out to touch something. So for example, right now I can feel my feet firmly planted against the floor. I can feel my hair against my neck. I can feel my legs as they're just over one another. So I can feel these things within my body without necessarily reaching out to touch something. Again, it's seemingly simple, but it can be really quite effective, particularly when we're at that very heightened state of stress, distress, anxiety, or any sort of emotion really. It can help bring the intensity down. So again, another one that I recommend you try out for yourself and see how it works. And then one more way to practice mindfulness, because it's nice to have a bit of a variety of ways to practice to see what you respond best to. This is kind of mindfulness of everyday tasks. So for some people, they really don't like the concept of sitting down and breathing and focusing on the breath for 10-15 minutes, and that's fine. This is a really nice alternative to that. So choose a task that you complete every day. Now, I've just got as an example there, brushing your teeth. Try to pair mindfulness practice to an activity that you do every day or a task you do every day. So every morning when you wake up and you go to brush your teeth, that's going to be your few moments and minutes of practicing mindfulness. And we use the senses to do this, right? So if I'm practicing mindfulness while brushing my teeth, I'm thinking about or noticing the pressure of the toothbrush against my teeth and gums when I brush my teeth. I'm noticing the sound of the water running. I might notice the temperature of the water. I might notice the taste of the toothpaste. So I'm using my senses to really just be present in that moment and observing what's happening. Again, this is a really nice alternative. It doesn't take too much time. It's easy to fit into the day. It's a way to regularly practice. And ideally what we find is that while we've been discussing very contained ways to practice mindfulness, so like particular activities, ideally what happens the more we practice is that we naturally start to become more mindful in our everyday life. So we find that when we're at work, we might be able to be more present focused on the task that we're completing. When we're, with our family and friends, we're able to be sort of more mindful and present with the conversations that are happening rather than perhaps consumed in our thoughts. So when particular emotional triggers come up, we don't necessarily get attached to them, but we're able to be more flexible in the way that we handle those triggers that arise. So mindfulness ideally shifts from being some skills that we use to a way of being in the world. So a few key takeaway points for us to keep in mind. So mindfulness helps us build this ability to be present in the current moment. As I said, it's a way of being. It's really useful to think of mindfulness as a way of being in the world and not just some skills that we utilize. Mindfulness can help us overall build a sense of emotion regulation. And as we've gone through quite briefly, but I do encourage you to go away and practice, there's lots of different ways that we can practice and use mindfulness and mindfulness skills. And as with anything, the more we practice something, the easier and more natural it becomes. So I do encourage you to try some of the practical exercises that we've talked about in this video. Give them all a go, see what works best for you, and start to build that flexibility in terms of the relationship you have with your thoughts, your feelings, and your own experiences, and utilize mindfulness as a way to be more present in your day-to-day life. Thanks for watching.